Rebecca Myers, you all, some of you have met before. And for those of you who don't know, Rebecca works for Miles Consulting. Jennifer Miles is a graduate of this program and went into business for herself, what, 10 years ago or something like that?
12 years ago maybe?
12, runs a lobbying and public relations firm, I guess you'd call it.
Yes, government affairs.
Government affairs. And Rebecca is a recent graduate of this program and ended up getting a job with Ms. Miles. And so now you're a lobbyist and you're actually shepherding the first bill that you're on top of.
I am.
So you're making it happen.
Emergency.
Well, I see.
Yeah.
Let me introduce you to Justin Vallis.
Hey,
Very nice.
great to meet you.
Let me see if I got this right. Policy and Advocacy Director for the Colorado Immigration Reform Coalition.
Immigrant Rights Coalition.
Immigrant Rights Coalition. So he works for a Colorado organization, and you live in North Carolina?
I used to live in North
Oh, okay.
Carolina. I was in North Carolina for about 5 years before moving back.
But you're a native Colorado.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually grew up in the mountains up in Eagle.
Oh,
So,
that's nice.
yeah, but it's nice to be back in Denver and be here again. I actually started my political organizing in North Carolina, so nice to transfer it back here.
Had one guy from North Carolina living in my house during Obama's first presidential campaign. So he was one of those carpetbaggers we were bringing in, outside troublemakers.
I guess
Colorado.
technically it's a reverse carpetbagger if we're coming back north.
Yeah,
So,
well, we needed it.
yeah.
Colorado was close. And the other guy is from California, so we were a hot house of troublemakers from outside the state.
Excellent.
And so it's only fair, I guess, that you went and caused trouble in North Carolina.
It's a lot of fun causing trouble in southern states. So,
Used to be hazardous to your health.
it still is. Definitely still is.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you both for joining us today and sharing with us some of your knowledge and experience about advocacy and including, but not necessarily limited to, lobbying, maybe mobilization, organizing at the grassroots, or some combination thereof. And I especially was looking forward to having you two talk about that, even though we've had other people in class talk about that, because you're both making really interesting use of technology in doing it. The students I inflicted upon the students a textbook that I think, Rebecca, you had to, Affecting Change by Haynes and Mickelson. Just pretty close to zero of that technology in here. And then, of course, I had them read the stuff that I wrote, and that's pretty close to zero. In fact, that is absolute zero, I think, when it comes to technology. You can tell that I worked in the pre-internet stage when I used to do this for a living in Washington. So, love to hear some war stories about the kind of work you do, the kind of methods you use, what you're trying to accomplish, and how, and you can just make this up in terms of how you work it in. But to what extent do you use online technology in the course of doing what it is that you do? Can I just throw it out and leave the two of you to...
Greg, you can start.
I mean, I'm glad to defer.
Okay, fine. So, I'm not a whiz in technology at all. Although somehow I've become that designated person in my office. Don't understand how. So it's taught me a lot, but it's kind of odd to say, but we actually use Twitter as a source, like a news source now. And so I've been talking with Jennifer a lot about getting a Twitter account for Miles Consulting, because we have one and we don't use it to tweet, we use it to follow. And it's really interesting because, so we follow tweets, and like the House Democrats, the House Republicans, they have people tweeting. Anytime you go down to the Capitol and you sit in a hearing, there are people there tweeting. So with my bill, I was on Twitter and I was like watching all the comments as I was sitting there. It was really odd. So somebody around me was texting and tweeting about what we were saying right then and there. So everybody knows about it, and so I guess a good example of how this, I suppose, it has a positive and negative effect is one of the bills that we've been working on is the pediatric dental bill to include dental benefits for kids. It's not currently covered under anything other than Medicaid. They want to expand that with Medicaid expansion, and we represent Oral Health Colorado. And they have drafted and brought forward a bill that they've been working on for over a year now. And Jennifer has been really involved with the language around that and the legal piece around it and who's gonna sponsor the bill and who's gonna listen to it. And it's so far passing, and when it got out of the first committee, the communications director from, I don't remember honestly if it was the House or the Senate anymore, but whoever that person was tweeting about the bill. And Jennifer then had to text him because one of the tweets was incorrect about who the bill's sponsor was and who brought the bill forward. And what happened is it got published in an e-magazine that some other organization was the lead, and that looked really poorly upon our client. So they weren't even mentioned in the fact sheet or anything. And it was just an oversight. So then we had to call the office, I think it was the House, so we had to call Speaker Fiorentino's office, and it just looked really bad. And they were able to correct it, but now I think it's moving into the Senate, and it could be flipped. Could have started in the Senate, moved in the House, I don't remember. But anyway, so whoever is hearing it now, she went to their office first before the hearing even was heard to make sure that they were very aware of who brought the bill forward, who wrote it, who is legislating it, who wrote the fact sheet, all of that, because it's a big deal. And to client base, I mean, it means something, and it's often what drives some of their funding and whatnot. So, and you know, as the lobbyist, it's of course, you want people to recognize you for the work that you're putting forth for your folks. And so that was kind of, it was a really unfortunate mishap, and it forced Jennifer to go ahead and have to communicate with you know, other folks. So the bright side of it is that it helped articulate the problem. It was probably overstated from the other side once it was corrected. So that was helpful. And I would say the other big piece that I've experienced is, so you now, if you have a bill that's being heard and they are having a robust discussion about it, instead of just sitting there helpless, we often text the senators or the Republicans or reps, whoever, and we'll say, remember to say this. So we can be sitting in our office listening into a hearing that we're following, or sitting there at the Capitol. This happened to me earlier this week, or last week, and the representative was presenting the bill, and they were drilling him on a piece, and I knew that he knew it, he just wasn't getting it out, so I just texted him, look at the talking points, paragraph 2. And they do, and it's weird. So you're sitting there silently, but you're really influencing a lot of decisions that are made. If I want to know, like the snow day on Friday, the House and Senate were closed, I looked at Twitter. Mm-hmm. So it was up before any email had come out or anything. So it's things like that that feel really odd, but it has become a news source, and I feel like when you're advocating and doing calls to action, grassroots mobilization, you really need to be able to communicate that way, because I think, and I even would say this more than Facebook, some people have professional Facebook pages, but I kind of feel like Facebook reaches a specific targeted population. People who work in this world, I have learned, seem to rely on Twitter more because it's less personal, and it's just more of a fact finder. It's really brief, it's succinct, and kind of gets the point out. And if you need to fix something, you can do it right away, and it'll pop up however people have it pop up in their life. So, but I'm not, that's the extent to what I'm still learning a lot about it. There's a lot of weird things.
Do you feel just a little bit like a puppet master when you're sending words to put in the mouth of a member of
Yeah.
elected representative, and they start saying what you just told them?
Yeah, it is odd. I mean, it's really strange, but it's also, it's kind of cool. Like this was the first bill that I've actively lobbied on from start to finish, and still working on it. And so I've been really heavily involved in a lot of other things, but this was the first one where my colleagues were like, you do it. And so if I don't know what I'm doing, it's really difficult. But you know, the legislator who was running this particular bill was really heavily relying upon myself and the lobbyists for the Public Defender's Office, and he sort of just pushed it off on me, which I have since learned to not let people do. But a lot of that is also done through like email or Twitter, or as you're sitting there, and it's all very last minute. And so what I find overwhelming about it all is I have to check more than just my email for updates now. So that is hard to keep track of sometimes.
And especially if you have a large list of folks that you're following on Twitter, then you're scrolling back and it's almost impossible to keep up with things unless you have like targeted places you're going back for news.
Is your organization a membership organization?
We are.
Okay, so you've got members that are tweeting, and so how do you have do you have rules around who can tweet what if they have the membership name attached to their Twitter account?
So the way that our Twitter account works is that we, like our member organizations, so the way that the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition is structured is a little different. We're a member coalition of members, or member holding organizations. And so like the organizations that we represent all have their own individual Twitter accounts, and they don't have access to tweet from our account, but that'll be either myself or the executive director or the communications director. And I think, I think you're completely right, and like there's a very distinct spread on how social media works, especially with politics and organizing. Like Facebook is great for getting in contact with like base members and like folks out in the community, whereas when you're trying to influence politicians, Facebook doesn't really mean as much to them, and Twitter is much more something that they rely on. And so for us, a lot of I think honestly part of what got me my job in the first place was my proclivity for 140 character sound bites. So like I was brought on to help guide Twitter and do the political advocacy.
There are jobs now for this alone. It's amazing to me.
And it can be
it's
a full-time
skill.
job.
It is a skill, a true skill, to be able to say what you need to say, at least for me, in 140 characters or less.
Yeah.
Not very much space at all.
Definitely. And depending on what sort of things you're working on too, like folks will, like one of the things with Twitter and recently added into Facebook are hashtags. Some folks aren't as comfortable with hashtags. So like when, like we're working on the Wage Protection Act this year, Senate Bill 5, and so like putting in Wage Protection Act as like your hashtag that you're tracking is gonna like totally decimate your ability to tweet anything coherent, right? Like half of your tweet is actually just that phrase, the hashtag. And so it's been kind of fun for us to like actually engage folks through Twitter, and sometimes there can be like an antagonistic component to it, where it's like when someone's saying something completely off base and without merit in hearings, I have to be very careful to switch between my personal account and my work account for some of those situations. But like if you have someone in a hearing who's just like way off base and they're like, oh, well, the Wage Protection Act, it's just going to close down all businesses because then we're just going to be funneling money into lawyers and into employees, and that's not what businesses do, except shouldn't. Anyway, so like when they go like way off, then you can be on your personal account, or if your organization is okay with those sort of engagements, like all of the elected officials at the Capitol, everyone in DC, they all have Twitter accounts, and so you can tag them so that their phones are vibrating every time you're saying something at them. And it's kind of funny because like there are a few folks who you'll see up there and they're on their phone, and you get this like glazed eye look when you're reading Twitter in testimony, and so you can like spot the politicians that are like following their Twitter feeds at that point and checking through. There was one hearing, I think it was civil unions last year, where or no, it wasn't even civil unions, but it was one of the committees where Representative Joshi was on, and he was sitting next
Very
to
conservative.
Yeah, the most anti-immigrant immigrant in the Capitol, and so he was like reading, and he was sitting next to Senator Johnston, or Senator Johnston had like sat in on something with him, and I don't know why they were sitting next to each other.
He's very liberal.
And so it was just like this funny like scene for me, and then like I saw Senator Johnston like scrolling, and then he like pulls up and takes a picture. And like a second later, he's talking on Twitter about like, oh, I'm sitting next to Representative Joshi at blah, blah, blah hearing. And so like then we start engaging. And so you can have those conversations while they're up there. And it's the same as like with the text message, right? You'll have folks who are, particularly for lobbyists or for folks in my job, I'm kind of like our lobbyist, but without being a full-on lobbyist. So when you can't get onto the floor of one of the chambers, and you hear one of your bill's proponents up there talking in favor of your bill, and you need to influence what they're saying real quick, you can use Twitter, you can use text. I found that they're not really good at checking their emails while they're on the floor, but Twitter and text, like those are the things that right away you'll hear whatever 140 characters or long iMessage you send them will then come back out over the microphone, and it always kind of gives me a giggle when you hear your words coming out of someone else's mouth.
It's distracting, I would say too, because you're trying to present an issue you care about, or someone is, and they're all sitting like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's hard to really gauge and get used to, I think, a little bit. But
Yeah.
it is effective. I mean, what I haven't learned yet about Twitter, maybe you can enlighten me, is how to, I don't really feel like Twitter is appropriate to have a back and forth conversation. So you could share a thought or an update or something, and that can be really effective. We often, sometimes if I need to know the outcome of a hearing but couldn't be there and can't be everywhere at once, I'll go onto Twitter and see if anyone was following it, and it'll tell me a vote count, or if it passed, if it died. And that's helpful to then at least pass on to a client if they were really interested in that. But what I can't quite figure out is if I have a question about that, I always just still email that person. I haven't figured out yet if you can still have that piece of it involved in Twitter. And then is everybody seeing that? I don't know that yet.
Yeah, so that's one of the fun things with Twitter too, is that everything that you tweet from a public account gets archived in the Library of Congress. So everybody from now going forward will be able to see that conversation. No pressure, no pressure. I've tweeted plenty of things I don't really want in the Library of Congress, but
wait, anybody who tweets anything in the world?
This has been going on for years.
Yeah. For about, it was like 2010 that they started archiving.
So many tweets.
Yeah, because it's like, since the Library of Congress is meant to like
What,
hold
for
that
like
national
terrorist
conversation.
attacks or something?
It's to record the national conversations,
It's a document of history.
Is somebody interested in that?
apparently.
The National Library of Congress.
Hey, if they've got enough servers to store all of those tweets, I am more than glad to help fill them.
Just
but
wait till you run for office someday and someone comes back and posts what you said way back when.
I'm just waiting for Senator Lundberg to say something from my Twitter feed. That'll be a fun day. But no, actually, that's like one of the really great things about Twitter is like people really engage it more when they can feel the voice and that kind of like person behind it. And so when you have kind of like the faceless organization Twitter account, people get used to one style, or like if you have one person that's primarily tweeting, like they'll get used to that person's voice and feel like that's, like in our example, that's SOWK's voice when I'm tweeting. But then every so often you'll have like our communications director or our executive director jump on and start tweeting from some event that I'm not at, and then I'll get like text messages and they're like, Justin, are you on Twitter today? This doesn't feel like you. And so people can like start to recognize that, but then that cross engagement of like having a discussion with a senator or representative, or with a member coalition or another organization working on the same thing, those really draw in sort of that kind of humanizing component of it, instead of it being just sort of like this tangential news feed. It's a news feed with a heart behind it, and so folks are much more likely to engage. So then they'll tweet their questions at you, and so you can then increase those conversations of like, well, I wasn't at that hearing. Hey, at so and so, how did this hearing go? Was there anything we should know? And then that starts that cross dialogue, and that helps really boost your follow count, which then I think also influences sort of how media and politicians perceive your Twitter account.
I think you're in a little bit of a different position too, because you've got members and you have a mission that you're advocating for.
Yeah.
And we have 18 different clients that represent different ideas or entities. So, and Jennifer is really careful about any communication that we have with anyone, whether it be a client or a legislator or an advocacy group or whatnot. We can't really be too partisan either way. We can advocate on behalf of our bill, and sometimes our bill do require partisanship, I suppose, or it'd be great if it was more bipartisan. But if we're like tweeting something in response to something that someone said or whatnot, we don't really have the liberty to just say what we think, because we have clients that fall across the map. Like we've got a few business clients, and we've got a few folks that they're large organizations made up of, like, for example, public health people. Most public health people tend to be pretty progressive in their mindset, but not all of them. And I've gotten emails before from individuals that say, oh, like you guys mentioned X from Senator Stedman, and I don't really believe that. Could you not include that? So we've had to have conversations around how do we promote different ideas or even different bills that we're working on, because we represent the social workers who care about everything, right? And then we've got people who are working in hospitals, and hospitals are just much more restrictive around what they believe they should be getting paid for and what Medicaid should look like and whatnot. So, and they could all still be on the same page, but that page is pretty widespread, I'm learning. So that's what I'm trying to decide around our Twittering, is if it's better to utilize it to learn information and take in information, or if it would be also helpful to share information, because we don't have an audience across the board that's always going to care about everything. Like, they all want to know different things, and then it's sort of like opening up a pool of information, like how much do we provide? Like, are we going to be Twittering all day, or are we going to be doing something else? And so we're still in the process, I think, of trying to decide what that might look like for us in terms of speaking out to the world. And now it's apparently recorded, so
Yeah. Yeah.
even more important.
And for us, we're a 501c3, so we're also nonpartisan, and so we've got member coalitions that stretch like a full gamut of things, and interests, and where they feel comfortable in certain pieces, and so that's where kind of the political advocacy shop and the communications shop kind of run into each other, and so it's been like a lot of back and forth for us trying to work through, deciding where our members stand and getting our members to like feel comfortable with a central position, and then we kind of speak from that space, and then we can go a little bit here and a little bit there outside of some of that bubble, but also trying to like pull it back into that central space. So it's definitely kind of an awkward balancing act, and that's where having the personal and the professional accounts come in a little bit more handy. I don't know. I think it can be really powerful. One, I guess, like kind of war story, or a Twitter war story, I guess. From where I'm at, when I started organizing, it was in 2010. Myself and a bunch of friends of mine in North Carolina started this group, the North Carolina Dream Team. It was all undocumented youth-led, and we were pushing for the DREAM Act. And in North Carolina, our senators were Richard Burr and Kay Hagan, and neither of them cared at all about immigrants or people of color at all. And so we had our hands full, right? And part of our strategy was to really amp up some of the social media pressure, because like when you look at things like Twitter, for example, the dominant user base of Twitter is young African American, Latino, and Asian, whereas like the more like celebrity news type tweets are generally like wealthier white celebrities and journalists, and so there's like a way to bridge some of that gap. And one of the things that we had taken on was joining in with the Drop the I-Word campaign, and so it was a campaign designed to get journalists to stop using the word illegal to describe people. And we figured that if we started shifting how journalists could talk, then we could have something more to hit back at Kay Hagan and get her to soften her position on. And so we had started we had joined in with the campaign, and we went on a very aggressive path with it. And I remember I wrote this blog post on our blog. It was like 450 words of like, "Hey, Ezra Klein, stop being such a jerk and don't call people illegal." And so then we started on this Twitter campaign with Ezra Klein, because he was like so adamant. He was by far the staunchest, like, no, I'm gonna call people illegal because I just don't care and I think it's right. And so we started like back and forth with him, while other folks took on other targets like Matt Iglesias or Post Bougie and some other folks. And it was all carried out through Twitter. And so after like a week of tweeting at Ezra Klein, things like, does Ezra Klein care enough about decent journalism to read this article? He tweets back at us, he's like, I do care that much, and I read your post. I'm still not convinced, but you make a good argument. And so then, we kept following up with him, and then as others fell, then we were like, hey, Matt Iglesias dropped the I-word. What's up, Ezra Klein? Like, why don't you care? And then finally, like, we have the AP dropping the I-word. We have this becoming more of a standardized thing where we then influence how media talks, and it kind of cuts out sort of that middle space, right? So like if you want to talk to a politician and you don't necessarily have a lobbyist or connections at the Capitol, you're probably just going to send an email to whatever is listed on the General Assembly's website. It's going to be read by their intern or by their staffer, and then get filtered and maybe get a response back, right? And with Twitter, like, you have the representatives and the senators sitting there on the floor, and you know they're all on Twitter, you know they're reading their feed, and so that way you can just like jump in and interject and just have your voice directly heard. And so there's like a powerful component of that where you cut out that middle person. It's the same with media too. I've noticed a lot of journalists actually do this thing where they turn Twitter into their notebook. Instead of carrying like a notepad, they'll just tweet everything and then just go back through their tweets for the quotes later to put their stories together. It's kind of funny to watch, actually. John Schroyer actually is probably one of the more notorious ones at the Capitol. He has like 3 different Twitter accounts because you have a post limit per day, and he will like frequently hit his post limit, and then John Schroyer too will start tweeting. I saw it get to Schroyer 3 once, and that was a busy day.
I didn't know that either. Huh. Does anyone have any questions about anything related to this? Or how it might be useful to what you want to do?
It seems like it would be really overwhelming at first to be managing all of the Twitter drama.
Mhm.
How would you approach it if you were a person who's never done that before, so you're not making yourself crazy?
So what I did, I was doing it a year ago. I was that person, maybe still am, but I just got onto everything that anyone told me I should get onto, and then after a couple of months, I realized who is not worth following, or who's not. It's not that they're not worth following, but it wasn't relevant to what I needed or was doing, and so I would just not. I just dropped them. I don't know if anyone sees that or what that means to people, but I just dropped them, and so now I'm limited in what I see, and I probably could follow more, but I try to follow it from the people or the groups that are tweeting about issues that our client base is going to care most about. So I try to follow like the House Dems, the House Republicans, the Senate caucus, the House caucus. There's a few legislators that we work with or that I just respect a lot that I follow. But other than that, I mean, you could follow everybody in the world. Literally, it's bizarre. And it's just not worth it to me. I'm not, because I like the idea of how quickly you can get the word out, especially when you're talking about advocacy. When you're talking like politics and policy, it's very different than what you're trying to do when you're advocating. And when you're doing grassroots mobilization, or even if you're doing like coalition development, for example, when you're really needing to get the word out or trying to change what's normal, I think this stuff is really helpful. But you will always get caught up with the day-to-day drama, because some people, it seems to me as though it's just their life, because all you see is their name or this group tweeting. And there's so many groups often tweeting about the same thing, I have found, that I just try to limit it to what's going to be most effective for me. I've never sent a tweet in my life, but I have like 10 people that follow me. I don't know why they would. I'm really boring, but I don't know. My guess is that people just see a name, like LinkedIn, like, oh, these are people you might know, and they just sign up to do it. But there's a lot of people I've talked to who don't actually, what is it? Is there a word? Tweet? Okay, so they don't tweet, but they follow Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it's just learning what's most effective. And so it is a little overwhelming, but you'll find too, like for me personally, there are some folks out there that tweet and they're with organizations that I really like and respect, but they tweet so much and so far to one side or the other that I almost get inundated with it and I can't hear it anymore. Like I have to just step away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And so because I have to be on Twitter with my job, I can't just not log on. I have to sort of see what's going on. So there are groups that I am still connected with through newsletters that they send electronically, or I might like them on Facebook so I can see updates that way, but I don't use them for Twitter. because it's incessant. And it gets almost, when you work in it or when you're advocating for a cause, it's really healthy to just step away because you get burnt out otherwise, especially with work that I think a lot of social workers tend to really become invested in. You know, and it's heavy. Like, I went to a meeting today, I don't know if you were there, for the wage theft bill.
No, I decided to pass.
So you can
I'm-
look on Twitter, I'm sure you'll see something.
Is
And
that
they
the
were sharing.
Social Legislation Committee this?
Yes, the SLC.
Emily, were you there?
So
Anybody
it
else?
was heavy, right? Like, they were sharing stories that, I mean, I don't know who wants to be the person that doesn't care.
Yeah.
And who wants to be on that side of the signing? Like, I don't, so they were sharing really personal stories around folks that just aren't getting paid for jobs that they're doing. And it's sad to hear that. And most people, I think, probably don't want to know that that's going on or happening. But you can't, I really believe you cannot hear that all day long for years and years and years and not have it start to psychologically impact you. And so just shutting it off is sometimes really important. And my coworker called me the other day and she was literally freaking out, almost to tears. I had to drop my computer off at the Genius Bar. I don't know what I'm gonna do tonight. And I was like, just relax. Like, it's one night. For one thing, it's Friday night. It's not like you have anything to do. And I'm sorry, but like, who cares? You have your phone. You can do everything you need to do from your computer on your phone. And it's 6 o'clock in the evening. So I called her on Saturday, did you make it through? But it's those sorts of things where I sometimes worry that we forget to just be people and have a conversation, for goodness sake, and not be so tuned in all the time. And so I've had to really watch that because sometimes you get really caught up in it, and quite frankly, I get really sick of it because I think it's more meaningful to pull somebody at the Capitol, pull them off the floor if they're a legislator, if they're a lobbyist, if they're an advocate and I see them. I want to have that relationship with them because when I need something, then I can go to them, and when they need something, they can go to me. And it's not all just via the air. And so I have found that there's importance in balance. But with that all being said, I mean, it spreads the word when you need something spread really quickly. And I was tweeted about by Jonathan Singer, who's a representative like a year and a half ago now. A lot of you know I worked in child welfare and I'm really passionate about those issues. And there was the whole Failed to Death series that came out, and
In the Denver Post.
in the Denver Post, and I just responded very quickly and lengthy to the journalist, Jennifer Brown, and she emailed me right back saying, can we publish this? And I said, I don't care. So they published it in the Post, and Jonathan Singer, I guess, read it and tweeted it, and I got responses from people all over the country. And that was really cool to feel like I was validated about something I said and something I care so much about and feel like I have some expertise in. And now, because of that, I have a relationship with Jennifer Brown from the Denver Post. And I have a little bit of a side project going on that Mike has been helping me with around just doing some coalition development with child welfare work, and she might really come in handy soon to help me spread the word and get things out. And so it's those relationships that's kind of, I'm just really big on the networking piece and the communication. And I think if you do it all, no offense, if you do it all over Twitter or Facebook or something, you lose something in it. So you gain a lot, but you can lose something and you miss things, you know. And so I've just had to try to be careful with some of it because it is so easy to get sucked in, and then it's 9 o'clock at night and you're like, what just happened to my night? So
it's limits and balance.
that's my perspective.
Mhm.
Other people, but I mean, there are people
Representative
who love
Singer,
it.
incidentally, those of you who don't know him, is a social worker.
He
And
was
has worked in child
he was the
welfare.
one who spoke today at the wage theft bill. He's a really good guy.
This is his third year running that bill.
Yes, he's working really hard on it, and so but that'll be a bill where I will follow. He's a representative that I follow on Twitter, and I feel like he's really meaningful. We are connected on Facebook, and like he is a very good example of how I think he separates what he discusses. So on Twitter, I feel like he's talking about things that are really relevant in the moment that would be really good for his constituents to know. Or if he's running a bill, and like I personally know sometimes you can't get there to testify, but they were people that had a lot of influence in the drafting of legislation, and they really want to know what's going on from their office. So he'll tweet things just for their benefit. Whereas on Facebook, he talks about all sorts of events and different things he's doing, and come have dinner with me and ugly sweater parties and all this stuff. So I think he does a fairly good job.
Yeah, Representative Salazar also does really well in
Yeah.
separating Facebook from Twitter, and so does Senator Ulibarri. But yeah, I think honestly, like the biggest thing for me is like I refuse to join the follow or team follow back, like just
What is
because
that?
it's
I don't
just
know what that is.
it's like a joking self-reference of like, if you follow a person, I'll follow, or if you follow me, I'll follow you back.
Oh.
Like, I'm not even gonna get into the pretension of thinking that I'm gonna follow everybody that follows me or follows the coalition's Twitter, just because that then becomes overwhelming and you can no longer like decipher what's relevant, and you'll like sit there scrolling back. Come to you just a second. Sorry, I'll be really quick. But I think that like for me personally, like I set like an artificial cap. Like I'm not following more than 888 people, and so.
I follow like 10 people. Just to
So-
give you a spread.
So I can never like actually read my full news feed, but like the way that it's staggered is like, you know, there are certain parts of the day where it's like when the Capitol's in session, I'm getting like Capitol tweets. When it's evening, I'm getting other like friends of mine that are working on immigration or Asian American issues in the evening, and then if I'm up working really, really bizarrely late, then it's all tweets from the Middle East around other things that I'm passionate about. And so it kind of staggers out through that way. And so I won't ever read all the way back through, but the pertinent conversations, I know when I can be in there and in those spaces. And I think there's a way for you to use those connections to build personal, deeper connection relationships. Like one of my closest friends on the planet, Sonia, is like, she lives in New York, and we became friends originally through Twitter around DREAM Act in 2010. And so like we would talk to each other. There are a bunch of us that like found each other at the immigrant rights movement online, and so we became sort of a social safety net for each other. And so like, you know, there were some really dark periods too in 2010 and 2011 where, you know, people were having mental health issues, and like suicide was a really big concern for a lot of us. And so like we could watch each other in those spaces and know like, oh, hey, I just saw this tweet, I'm really concerned. Hey, how are you doing? And like pick up the phone and call and make those personal connections. And so I think there's a strength in how that then turns into a free place to crash when you're in New York or DC or Los Angeles. Or,
Right. That's true.
And I think it also transfers onto the politicians, because like Senator Crowder, I'm actually glad y'all were talking about Crowder earlier, because he's one of my favorite like wiggle room middle guys.
He's a bit.
Yeah, he's a really sweet guy. But like Crowder and Dorr, I went last year to the pilgrimage to Amache, the Japanese American prison camp in southern Colorado, and I was thinking it's just going to be Japanese people, like no one else even knows this place is here, no one else really cares. And I go there and it's Crowder and Dorr standing up there, and they like bring flowers and they offer incense offerings at the shrine, and I guess that's just their thing. They go every year. And so like I'm there with my camera taking pictures, and then they hit me up. They're like, hey, you know, I've seen you on the Capitol. It's great to see you out here. Oh, I didn't expect to see you. Hey, can we use some of your pictures for our website? And so like there's the other social media things like Flickr that are also useful political connecting tools, because if you take a lot of really good pictures, and then politicians obviously want an image that's flattering to them. So then you kind of have that pull with them later. So I saw.
My question has to do with like with following groups. If you're working with like a 501c3, how much does like following or retweeting or liking a group look like an endorsement? I know it's harder on Facebook. I was at an organization and we were at a women's resource center, and we liked Planned Parenthood Votes, and then Planned Parenthood Votes changed their Facebook profile picture to Obama, and so then Facebook's advertising was saying that we liked a picture of Obama.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of feedback for that, and then I'm at 9 to 5, and I know we also discussed like, can we retweet political parties? Is that okay? How does that work with like being a nonpartisan group?
So from a 501c3 status, it's really hard. Like the only way that I've been navigating it is like for the Capitol work, I follow the House Republicans and the House Democrats, the Senate Democrats, the Senate Republicans, and I don't retweet them. So that way it's like I'm getting both of their news feeds, but I'm not endorsing, because a lot of times like you'll see on people's Twitter profiles, like retweets do not equal endorsements. Nobody really takes that seriously. And so So like being very careful about who you're retweeting and is one thing. I mean, following folks like the Heritage Foundation follows me, and I'm sure if they actually read what's on my Twitter feed, they would not be following me anymore.
But I disagree, because I think that you have to know the other side.
Yeah.
And I think there is a skill that a lot of people are nervous about, and I want to know exactly what is going on the other side and in their mind and what they're saying, because I want to know what my opposition might be. So they might be very strategic to follow you, even if they don't agree with anything you're saying, because they want to know
What arguments
what
they have
you
to
say.
face.
What are you saying exactly? And
Exactly.
so I think it's
Yeah.
like you were asking, how do you not get overwhelmed? I would say start with whatever your issue, area, passion, whether it be personal, professional. Choose one that has both sides of the arguments and just see, because I think it can be really robust, and it can add to what you already may not know about it, or certainly at least expose you to some other mindset. Like if you want an example, do it for abortion. Honestly, it's find one group that says yes and one group that says no, and no others. Otherwise you will be definitely overwhelmed. But it is fascinating to hear what I wouldn't even say the other side, what either side says when they are passionately speaking about something like that. So there is strategy in knowing what your opposition is saying, because you want to be prepared.
So it's one thing to follow and know the opposition, and as well as what your friends are saying. It's another thing to retweet or otherwise give exposure to partisan organizations. The issue that Christine raised reminds me of the fact that the Internal Revenue Service, which enforces the rules about what 501c3s may and may not do, has come down, as the Alliance for Justice reading that is available on our website points out, that if you are putting up a link to another organization which is partisan, it might be a C4, it might be a 527, it might be a political party, it might be a campaign, if you link to a part of the non-C3's website that is particularly partisan on something, even though you didn't expend any funds, which is the way the IRS usually enforces the rules, the IRS might come down on you and say, well, everything that you're investing in your website is now suspect, and you may be subject to an enforcement action by the Internal Revenue Service. But you notice in the Alliance for Justice reading, there's also a contextual judgment that auditors or whoever from the Internal Revenue Service is going to make. Say you link to the homepage of another non-C3 organization, which is not so ostensibly partisan, and it seems pretty clear that it is mission appropriate given your exempt purpose as a C3, which of course must be nonpartisan. They might allow it, but it's a gray area, and you're at the mercy of the judgment of an IRS auditor. What I have not seen, maybe I didn't read the Alliance for Justice thing carefully enough, I've certainly not researched it, is what happens when you retweet instead of linking. And does that create liabilities? Maybe Christine, you looked into that a bit.
No, I was just wondering, how frequently does that happen? Like, how does the IRS follow everybody's Twitter feeds? Like, how are they monitoring this, and how frequently do people get sanctioned for it?
I mean, they can come up, either complaints can be filed, or during audits, those things come up as well. I've never been in a situation where that's been an issue, but yeah. I guess it also depends on how frequently you tweet, and there's kind of a I can get away with it moment. Like if you're putting out 100 tweets a day and you retweet one thing from partisan space, but then a week later there's 700 tweets that have buried that pretty deep down, the chances of you being found for that are pretty small. But at the same time, I don't think it's that sort of, I think from an organizational standpoint, it's not safe practice.
Especially if the Heritage Foundation is following you.
Exactly.
I would suggest perhaps talking with your supervisor or someone about whether or not there is a policy in place, because I'm hearing an opportunity for some policy development. I know a lot of C3s, C4s, C6s, which is membership, they often now are having to look at this and having to rewrite it into like strategic planning or 5-year roadmap for their organization, for example. But the other piece that would be interesting is, and I know 9 to 5 fairly well, I've seen them down there a lot, and they're pretty active, and they overlap with some of the work that we do. And they're pretty partisan on some particular issues, very much so, and proud to be. And so I would be interested in knowing if they have developed a policy around who is then responsible. So if someone retweets something personal or professional, and the organization is notified because of that or sanctioned, who is responsible ultimately? Is it the executive director? Is it the person who tweeted? If it is an account that is from the organization, how do you even know who tweeted that? Things like that, because I would be curious to know how you're gonna work with that, and then how are you going to work that into like new staff hiring or protocol and decision making? Because what if, a good example would be, what if you are an organization and you hire someone to do policy work or something, and part of their role is to tweet or follow tweets, and your organization, for example, you don't have the authority to take a stand on a bill or decide whether you're in support of or opposed to a particular issue. But if a person tweets about it because they just don't know that protocol exists, which happens all the time, then that can have real aftermath and consequences to an organization, because especially if an organization is grant funded. So Denver Public Health is a good example. We've been working with them heavily on strategic planning for policy and advocacy work specifically. And they fall under the purview of Denver Health, which is an enormous organization. And so Denver Public Health is one of the branches of Denver Health. Denver Public Health wants to have their own policy team, and they want to develop a way to work within policy, whether that be lobbying or just calls to action, advocacy work, writing policy briefs, etc. Denver Health has their own government affairs office, but nobody knows how to communicate between the two, and it's really nebulous in a lot of ways. But Denver Public Health, there are people within that piece of it that are also members of all these other advocacy organizations for public health issues. And they might be the president of something, and that person might be asked to go testify on a bill. But you have to be very clear what hat you're wearing when you do that. Because if he goes down and testifies on a bill, and everyone's tweeting it, and Facebooking it, and blogging it, and whatnot, but Denver Health, over here, big old Denver Health, never said, hey, Denver Public Health, you're okay to take a stand on that. Like, it has to be very clear. So I would be curious to know if an organization such as 9 to 5 has developed or implemented.
I think we have a bit of a policy. I know that there was a question that came up though, because there was a group that thanked us in a tweet that was a party. So they had it was the Working Families Party. We had a big teletown hall, and they were like, thanks 9 to 5 for putting this on. So I was like, can we retweet this? It's partisan for a partisan group, but they're just saying thanks to us, and I know, but we have one staff person who's set to do that, and then every staff person has personal ones, and then there's the executive director has an account, and all the chapters have accounts. So
I think it's changing the way that policy and advocacy works, and how you communicate an idea. And then, of course, you run into the issue of somebody misinterpreting what you had hoped to say. And so then if your name is at all attached to that, but it's not exactly what you meant, words are very powerful in the world of advocacy and lobbying and legislative work. So one word can change the meaning of something, and if someone tweets something not realizing that, then it's attached to what you're saying, and
which is a problem run with any media generally.
Definitely.
I think there was a thing on MSNBC, somebody was fired over a tweet within the past few days.
Oh, you can get a lot of people who lost their jobs over tweets.
Somebody on MSNBC's Twitter page posted about the biracial Cheerios commercial, the biracial family in Cheerios commercial, and made a joke about what right-wing people might think about it. Conservatives were not very happy that they were being called out for something like that, and so the person was fired immediately for that Twitter post.
Yeah, and so that's the danger zone. Part of the way that I've seen C3's work, and I'm fairly familiar with 9 to 5's Twitter. We had some Twitter party during the last hearing. And then it went between the personal and the professional. So I think part of the way that C3 structures usually work is that a lot of times people have this like terror that like they can't do anything political as a C3. Really, when it's a C3 status, like you can't endorse a political party or a political candidate. Like that's your line, right? And so like when it comes to issues around bills, or if Senator Lundberg's up there saying something factually inaccurate, it's not inappropriate for me as SOWK to tweet at Senator Lundberg and say, hey, actually, here are the facts behind what you're trying to say, and you're getting it totally wrong. And so it's not, at that point, you're not bridging your C3 status into a C4 round.
Do you guys know the difference between C3 and C4?
We're about to discuss that difference to a fairly well after the break.
Oh,
They've been
okay.
doing some reading on it.
The gist of it is C3 is a nonprofit and a C4 is usually an advocacy. So their leeway is a little different.
Yeah, C4s are allowed to take partisan positions, C3s aren't. And so,
Some organizations are both. They have different arms, so you
Yeah.
get C4.
like SOWK. But so I think part of what happens within a C3 structure is usually they will have their communications shop set where it's like I had like 12 hours of training on the difference between a C3 and a C4 and what I can't bridge into and what I can. And so you'll get that sort of training, and then you're part of the communications team, and so you kind of know, you know the field that you're playing on. And then it's just left up to you to play in that field, and when things go over that line, then that's something that can be brought back in and talk about it. You can delete the tweet, apologize, and there can be other consequences to broaching past where you're supposed to be playing. But a lot of times the organizations have a fairly tight shop when it comes to Twitter, making sure that not every staff member has access to it, and making sure the staff members that do have access to it know to switch between their personal and professional ones, and how to use their phones appropriately to not accidentally tweet.
We should begin to wrap this up, but just to respond to Christine's question, I'll give you an opinion of what I think is going on, and I won't guarantee it. We could think of the important differences we'll be discussing after the break between C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, and so forth. Does the Internal Revenue Service that is in charge of forcing the rules about what you can do with your particular type of recognition of tax-exempt status, depending which category you fall in, do the George Orwell 1984 thing, monitor all your communications and get you at every opportunity? I personally doubt it very much. There's such a bureaucracy. Congress has not been very generous about funding an agency that's supposed to bring in the revenue, which is an odd contradiction right there. And if you've been following the news about IRS trying to figure out what to do with C4s now that some mobilizers have been exploiting C4 status for unintended purposes, I don't think the IRS is that well together. I think that the real enforcement action happens among your opponents who decide to get you for having violated IRS regs as they understand them, and they file a complaint with the IRS, and if the IRS is not too busy, which it often is, then IRS might take action against you because you ticked off somebody who was not inside the bureaucracy.
Like Acorn.
Yes, very much Acorn. And so it's kind of random, dumb luck as to whether you get caught for breaking the rules or not, particularly in this evolving area where bureaucratic regulation issuance has not been able to keep pace like new technology, like Twitter. Who knows, Flickr and everything else involved. So I got a hunch that that's where the IRS is at. But why take risks if you don't have to? At least know what the rules are, which we'll talk about after the break. And you can still play safe and be very effective. By way of kind of recapping, we really interesting conversation between the two of you about how do you go for balance, how do you avoid overload, how do you keep from oversubscribing to too many folks that you follow and your you get all backed up and you can't even keep current, you feel swamped and you need a night off, and et cetera, et cetera. I imagine we all have our different personal tolerances as to just how plugged into the matrix we want to be. But that's an important choice. But there's also the question you discussed between whether to follow or whether to tweet yourself or retweet. And you're going to be passive receptive, or are you going to be proactive transmitting? And that's an interesting strategic choice that you make, and part of it is the IRS regs, but there's also strategy and tactics involved there as well. But let me ask you, if you just kind of review for us, how you choose between these different methods, these different modalities. For what purposes these days, given the kind of advocacy that each of you do, which is somewhat different, do you use email, following tweets, tweeting and retweeting, using Flickr,
What is?
Flickr, it's a
using
photo sharing site.
Facebook? We've had all these different modalities mentioned in this conversation. Each of them, I gather, has its advantages and disadvantages, and each kind is good for different purposes. You began to get into that a little bit, but would you mind kind of wrapping up your views on the most effective uses of each of these different modes of online communication?
Sure. For me, like, I think it depends on your base and what you're aiming for, right? So like, when I've been organizing with high schoolers, like, I can't even send them emails because they're not going to check their email. I need to send them something on Facebook, or I need to tweet at them because that's the only way they're going to see it, or I text them. And so, like, we have emails, but at the same time, we don't want to like be that group that over bombards with emails, right? Like, I've unsubscribed from lists for getting 2 or 3 emails a week because I just don't have time for all that stuff to clog up my inbox. And so things like Twitter are great for like this political spur of the moment, or when like there's a protest or a civil disobedience. Those are those kind of like live action reporting from the scene kind of spaces. Facebook has been really good for either like advertising and inviting community members into a space, or then reporting back out to community members. Tumblr, I don't think most C3s should actually even go down that road. Just don't. So
Why
like,
not?
it's just
Waste of time?
it's a very different space to engage in, because it's more of a blogging type platform where then whatever you type then can be passed around everywhere else. You'll get all sorts of random comments, or it just won't be relevant because of the biggest user bases for Tumblr are generally still in high school, or in very particular areas. So it's like it's a fine spot to host a blog. Just don't expect a whole lot of engagement in there. So I don't know if it's nearly as effective for like a C3 type organization to use, rather than just having their own blog. Community organizations, like a lot of the undocumented youth groups that I work with, have Tumblr because that's a good way to get to their base through hashtags and conversation trackings. So it does have some utility, particularly if Tumblr is good like for a youth organizing component or a youth information sharing component. Flickr and Instagram are entirely photo based. Flickr is more for like hosting your albums and having stuff out there that can be then used and redistributed. It's more like when you have a member of your organization or part of your organization does like photography of events or situations, having those up there then makes them much more accessible for other folks to see. So like journalists or politicians, or just having a space off of your server to host everything so it doesn't slow down your own website. So I think like for SOWK, we try and do like a 1 or 2 email a week type thing. We'll tweet when there's some live action going on, and then Facebook is like maybe 3 times a week, 4 times a week at most, or sharing like news articles and that sort of thing. And that's what's been really working well for us to keep folks engaged.
Thank you.
That's really
We don't use Flickr or anything. I could see when it'd probably be most helpful, like, for example, if the governor is signing a big bill, they always take a bunch of photos and send them out. And so a lot of people I see put them up on Facebook. But if somebody had like an album that they shared among their community members or whatnot, a membership organization would probably benefit from something like that, because you could just have albums from different events for the same viewership, I suppose. So that would probably be helpful. We don't use it. I've seen it only a little bit, I would say. But for me, it's between Twitter and Facebook. I almost always email. I think it's more the nature of my job. A lot of texting or emailing to get in touch with people, or like last minute meetings and whatnot. But with Twitter, again, I haven't tweeted before, but I use it and get on it if I'm down at the Capitol and I'm waiting and need to know when to switch rooms to hear a different hearing, for example. So if it's a very much right now, I need to know what's going on or where I need to be, I often will use Twitter. And that's probably how, and if we were to start tweeting, I would probably use it mostly to share end results of something, because I think that's probably just the easiest and most effective for my work. But Facebook, we have like a website, and we don't have a Facebook page on purpose, because there's no reason it wouldn't help anything that we were doing, and it also, everything in the lobbying world happens so quickly, and things become irrelevant really quickly. And so, if we had a Facebook page for Miles Consulting, half of it would be outdated in a month and wouldn't really be relevant anymore. And so I don't really see how that would be beneficial to us. But for personal reasons, using Facebook to connect with people in my professional world has been really helpful, for less like advocacy, but more around event planning. So, it's really important to support your legislators during election years as lobbyists. Fundraising, PACs, all of that stuff is really, really important as a lobbyist and as a legislative liaison, because you need your face to be known to different legislators so that they will listen to you when you want to have influence and input over the decisions that they are working on. And I find Facebook to be really helpful. So I am not friends with all 100 legislators, but I am friends with my direct legislators and those who we interact with all the time. So a handful. And I had to make that decision, and that's something I would say that you learn as you do the work, like who's going to be the most relevant, and sometimes it's who has the most power behind them. If you know that something controversial is going to be coming up that you're going to be directly involved in the next year, you might want to sign on to Mark Birandino's Twitter, and you might want to see what Senate President Carroll has to say. So it's things like that, at least from a professional standpoint. So that's the only crossover I have is Facebook, because I just have a personal Facebook account. But I also know that, I'm probably weird. I only post about my baby, and people don't care about that except my family, and that's the only reason I have Facebook. And so no one's really paying attention to what I'm posting, but it is really helpful for when folks have events. So if I feel like, oh, that's something that I could really go, it would be really good for me personally to get out there to this event and have my face seen. I find that to be really helpful. And again, I can choose, and I'm not very good at checking my Facebook. I don't check it every day, and I don't get email notifications because I don't want to. So I think I probably miss a lot, but it works for me, and I do my job effectively, and I rely heavily upon other people to let me know what's going on, because it's a lot of just communicating back and forth in a lot of different capacities. So
Terrific. I didn't even mention texting on my list, but obviously that played an important role in dealing with individual legislators and so forth. And I'm sure there's other uses for that as well.
It's pretty crucial.
Blogs have their use from, depending on what you're up against. And then all this, of course, is changing and evolving. And staying current on it is going to be a challenge for any policy practitioner in the field of social work. It's an exciting field. And I'm sure glad that you folks are willing to talk about something that I know too little about. So please join me in thanking our panelists for today.
I will say, if anyone is or able bill, so the wage theft bill is up tomorrow to be
Yeah.
heard, and you can listen online. If you're interested in coming down, I'll be down there if anyone wants to come with me.
I'll be there in the room too.
So,
Well,
oh, fantastic. So it'll be really interesting. And then
s-
after that,
SCR
there's
356,
Yeah.
or at 2 p.m.
You guys all have my contact info, right? Do most of you guys have it? So Mike has it if any of you need it, but I'm happy to meet people down there if you are interested. I would get there early because.
It's okay if I throw that on the homepage for the Blackboard site?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great.
But I think it's the third bill up, so there will be a lot of people there and it's all very boring stuff, so hopefully it won't take very long. But it should be really interesting, and if anyone has questions about it or if you listen in, feel free to email or whatever, and I'm happy to talk more about why something happened or didn't happen. I'm really curious to see what happens, so.
Yeah.
Great.
And we've
Thank
only
you
got 2
both.
people
Oh.
for tomorrow. Oh, we only have 2 people for our testimony and support tomorrow, so hopefully it won't be a long drag out fight with our stuff on there, so.
Thank you very much. Let's take a break. We'll be back in 10 minutes.